Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we're taking a walk down memory lane with Tom Morkes, a guy that I met up with, we think 9 years ago-ish, where somehow he was in town near Seattle. We drove out, we had lunch, and him and his wife, as he was traveling around the country. And little did we know what our future journeys would take us to, where now Tom has done a lot more with authoring books, self-publishing, with his podcast, with his consulting, with his company InfoStack. And we're talking today about that vision of when you get to that level of success and you want to move beyond the company that you first designed, and you're looking at what might happen next. Do you want to scale? Do you want to exit? How do you grow a business beyond just your personal brand? That's what we're diving into today. Tom, welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Brian, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited because you're a guy who's done a lot of things. And part of your story is that you were a commissioned officer, and you talk off and on about that experience you had leading men in combat in Iraq and how that relates to leading teams. And before we get into the whole building your business to exit thing, now that you've looked back, because the last time we had this conversation was something like 9 years ago, where I love just how you talked about it then. I'm curious now, with an additional basically decade of experience in the relationship of what you learned then about leading men in combat and now leading men and women for such a long time in your various companies. What do you find is, what do you find is true in terms of what you seek to be as a leader today?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. That's that's a good one. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. I guess it's funny because it's just so interesting looking back on it. So this will be a little bit of a retrospective, because how can it not be? I mean, we go back like 10 years, so it's just funny to think. But in that time, for sure, it's like the military had it just was very structured. So I fell into that structure. So my component of leadership was very structured, because it was like, here, you're a platoon leader. Here, you're a company commander. And I kind of knew my left and right limits. I kind of knew what I was responsible for. But then going into entrepreneurship, starting from scratch in that, and just going to self-publishing, just blogging, podcasting, trying to figure it out on my own, and then trying to grow that into something that can not only sustain me, but then sustain others through through employment opportunities, and then growing that side of the business, the publishing and media side of it over this last 10 years. It's interesting because there's a lot you can take from the military and apply it to the world of entrepreneurship and creativity and writing and art. And that's a lot of what I use my blog to talk about. But I think now with where I'm at, okay, I say that also to say that along the journey, there are points that like kind of change you, like little tipping points or experiences or whatever, or maybe it's just like the idea of like building that leather skin and getting to that point where you're kind of like a veteran at it in what you do. So like my perspective today, long story short, my perspective today is very different than it was even just a few years ago. So now with what I'm trying to do when it comes to leadership is, one, like, for me, there's a spiritual, religious, personal component to it. Like for me, like a moral, ethical type approach where I want to do something that's good, genuinely good for the world and good for people, good for my team. So that's kind of number one. Like, is this something I can fully get behind? Two, can I serve them? So can I be the kind of person who is still a servant leader, so to speak? And I think I did learn that from the military as well. So there's lots of other little things, but those are the big things. I want to be the person that others would want to follow, that I would want to follow a long time ago, which I know, my memory is starting to fade, but you think back in those military days, like that I would be the kind of person that I would want to follow. And that's the big thing for me, at least.
Beautiful. I remember back when I was an employee, which is even longer ago than you and I had lunch, where I once had a client that I'd sold for this marketing agency. And I was uninspired by the actual work we were doing because I didn't really believe in the mission of that client. I went and talked to my boss and I said, I have a problem. I'm a sales guy and I don't believe in what I'm selling, not because the product of marketing services isn't good, but because this person we just sold, I don't believe they're virtuous, really. And my boss says, I get how you feel that way. And he said that for him, he was feeding dozens of his staff and their families, literally. And he got a lot of value out of that, of that being a leader and caring for the families of his employees. And also a significant number of the clients were doing great work in the world. Some were paying the bills, but he was okay with that because he had that feeling of, I am serving all my employees. And it was probably my first big education in that the motivation for keeping on going. There's so many different versions of motivation. And I'd love to move from that to talk about business building, where now you're dabbling in dabbling is not the right word. You're involved in a number of different projects right now, and you are growing them, and you're looking at, well, what's next?
Hmm.
After you attain some level of success in any particular area, you ask, what's next? And I want to know, how does Tom Morkes look at, if you have 10 possible directions you can take a project in, how do you decide which direction to go in?
I mean, that's another golden question, right? It's like, oh man, I subscribe to kind of I could think this, like, I don't know, philosophy thought process that I think, like, I don't know if I first heard it from Nassim Taleb, but he seemed to really articulate it very well for me. That really, like, connected the dots for me. And he's the author of Anti-Fragile and Black Swan. And he had this, like, I think it was like N1 or 1N strategy or something like this. It was like a way of being anti-fragile. And the way to, how do I explain this? So to be more robust, but beyond robust, is anti-fragile. It's like when crazy things happen, you can benefit from them, right? Well, so the idea there is, you want to open yourself up to optionality. So you want to have more options. So I always look at things and say, how does this expand or give me more options or better options? And I look at options. So I'm always looking at that piece of it. I know it's kind of strange. So it's not always directly tied to, like, just the money or just X, Y, or Z, but more like options. Like, if I do this, will this create more opportunities? That's another way to look at it too. More opportunities down the road as well. So optionality and opportunities are kind of the two ways I look at things. So then just weighing them, and and then of course we get into, once you choose a course of action, it's like you want to have not necessarily a plan. It doesn't have to be that detailed. I mean, you probably do want a plan. I just don't really work on elaborate plans. I kind of
You've
just
heard of
wing
folks
it.
from an Army veteran, don't make plans. Okay, back to the interview.
Yeah, it's like that old Mike Tyson, like, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the head. And it's
Yeah.
like, so it's good to have a plan, but a lot of people just, that's all they do is they plan. So at some point you got to pull the trigger, and then you just want to have what I try to do, at least my approach to it. And it's been helpful for me, and I think a lot of clients that I work with, to do it this way. Like, what's the critical path? What now? What next? And then saying, well, where do we have to get to? Like, how do we measure this, where we know we're on the right path? And some of these things are big. Like, we are dealing with some of these questions right now that are like, it's not so much a time horizon of like, what am I going to do this, like, next week, but the time horizon is like a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. Like, maybe not that far out, but I definitely am thinking more like year to 2 year out, which is strange. And maybe that's not strange to a lot of people who are listening to this, who are like maybe more established business owners and stuff like that. But again, my transition here is more like from that entrepreneur hustling, getting started, launching, and then growing it, where my perspective or my timetable was much shorter. It was like, let's just get something going. Let's get it started. Let's see what hits. And we still approach things that way, like experimentally, but at the same time, I'm still thinking longer time horizon, if that makes sense. So again, optimizing then for opportunities and optionality.
Even being aware that there are multiple time horizons in which you could be operating is a
Mm-hmm.
thing that a lot of people miss. I
Yeah.
found in my life that I tend to do things for a decade. So I
Yeah.
played soccer for a decade, I played trombone for a decade, I did sword fighting for a decade. And I just notice this appears to be my rhythm, where
Yeah.
after a decade or so, I finally gained, a basic amateur level
Yep.
of something, serious amateur level, and then I seem to do something else.
Yep.
And now I'm 10 years into Redbeard Consulting. So back in 2012, I started working with Keep, known as
Yep.
Infusionsoft back then. Okay, and now I've written a book on it, and I've been on stage, and I know all these people all over the place. Wonderful, created courses. Okay, so what am I doing now? Is my plan, because of course the software keeps on changing. So I could continue to say, I'm going to continue to be a thought leader about this one piece of
Yes.
software. But what else am I doing? And then I find my mom retires, I buy her company, and now I own lendersonlinetraining.com, where, okay, they've been a client for a decade, and I've been involved in the business since I was about
Mm-hmm.
4 years old, licking stamps for flyers. But now I
Nice.
can see, okay, well, maybe there's a view, and it's not the only view, and it may not be the best view, but there's a view that says my 10 years with Redbeard Consulting and focusing on growing systems of clients might have been preparation for the exact questions
Totally.
I'm facing in scaling Lenders Online Training from a founder-led company into a scalable solution that can serve not just whatever we're currently serving, like 1% of the lenders in the US to more like 10% of the lenders or 50% of the lenders in the US. And I've helped other companies grow like crazy. And now it's the chance for something that I have the equity in. But that it's the optionality thing you're talking about. If you had asked me 2 years ago, hey, are you doing all this so you can go buy your mom's company and go scale it 10x? I'd say, I guess that could happen. I don't know. But I bought the optionality right by building a skill
Yep.
set.
Yep. And let's talk about that for a second. I'm kind of curious. I want to actually look at you. I don't know, maybe you've already talked about this on the podcast, but so you just bought that. I think that's super interesting. And I feel like there's a couple topics there that might be worth getting into, but so I just want to field a couple of thoughts. One is this idea. I feel the same way, man. I've been doing this stuff for like 10 years. And when I first got started, it was like, how does blogging work? How does podcasting work? How does writing and self-publishing work? And I was very motivated to learn and share as I learned. And that's actually what built up quite a bit of my following. But then after like 10 years, you're like, I feel like I've said all the things I need to say. And unless I'm going to try to like keep up with trends, which I don't believe in trends in a way. I mean, I do and I don't. I do for marketing, but I don't for like core business or like being, use the trend to tap into a market, but I don't think you should build a business based on a trend if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm getting a little off into the weeds, but the point here is,
love it.
I just feel like, it's like, so at what point do you shut it down? There's also so much of this that's attached to us, isn't it? Like with me, it's like I started back in 2012 as well. So it's like we have a very similar time horizon right now. It's like going on a decade with my blog. I'm like, should I still be doing this? Should I just burn it all to the ground? Should I shut it down? What should I do with it? Like, I still see some things to be worth sharing, but what's your take on it? What's your opinion? And now you've got the business. I think that's super interesting.
So it's what kind of legacy do you want, right? They're serving people in the moment. And sometimes you can serve people in the moment in a way that serves them forever. My wife, Carrie Keith, at carriekeith.com, Kari Keith.com, she helps women change their mindset, create a better relationship with themselves. And she does this through courses, her Sacred Self Journal, one-on-one coaching. And she serves some people in ways where those people's family lineages for 10 generations will be improved based on the work these women have done on themselves under the care of my wife. If she stopped today, that would still exist, right? That's a different thing than, let's say, she's on episode 60-ish of her podcast, then the Soul Power podcast. Creating that, she could say, well, I want to create something that's going to be paying people forward for the next 50 years, assuming podcasts still exist in some form. We can still access them then. What kind of legacy, and it's really, Tom, what motivates you? Would you rather have a legacy and then go kick up your feet on a beach because you've helped people and you've done the thing, or would you rather more build something continually that's continually growing, or would you rather burn everything you have to the ground and open your mind up to do something new? Do you surf?
I don't, but keep rolling with it. I get I'm sure I can roll with the analogy.
Well, no, the analogy is, what if you stop your sold off all of your interest in every business you're involved in, and as fast as you could, which is probably 3 months to a year, and then you went surfing for a year. You moved somewhere where there was great surfing. You got surfing instruction every day. You spent an entire year just working on yourself surfing. Do something totally different. Let your brain relax, and as soon as you're relaxed, which might take a while depending on how involved you are in your companies, you sort of woke up and you said, "What matters?"
Yeah.
Your answer to the question, what matters and what are you supposed to do with these remaining years alive, would probably be different after a year break than it would in the moment. And we can take this and we can shrink it on down all the way to a weekend or a week of being offline. What happens? When's the last time you spent an entire week offline?
Yeah. It's been a
Was
while.
it 2012?
I mean, maybe.
So we always are, we're confusing ourselves. We're getting excited. We're getting the dopamine hits from, there's all these opportunities everywhere. And those of us involved in multiple projects, like I have, okay, which book am I writing right now? How's my podcast going? And I'm involved. It's like 3 COO clients, my wife's company. I own 2 companies. So I'm involved and I'm excited, but that's really distracting. And we're not designed for that. We're designed to go hunting and then to come back to our cave, maybe scratch something and some cave art on the wall and go watch the meat cook and watch the smoke make pictures in the sky. And yet, instead of that, we're involved in 6 companies while writing a book, etc. So I think that's the most interesting thing for you, Tom, is how can you get quiet? What is your quiet? My quiet is going for long walks. I live next to this nature preserve. If I go for the full loop, it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours of walking. The dog loves it. And almost always when I come back, and I don't have earphones going on, I'm not podcasting it up, I come back and I know something I didn't know. when I left about who I am and where I'm going. And as far as I know, as far as I can tell, that is different for everybody. You have to figure
Mm-hmm.
out for Tom, with Tom's life, all your obligations, all the things that bring you joy, how do you get quiet and how can you do it more often for a sufficient
Mm-hmm.
amount of dose to where you can listen to yourself? And I'm surely being influenced by my wife here with her business with women, but how can you listen to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
It's nice that you can blog and write books and podcasts, whatever, but are you good at listening to yourself? That is so rare in entrepreneurs today.
Yeah, and so on that, kind of dovetailing off of that, I think that's a great point and great question. What are your thoughts then on like this? I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. More like almost like creative creative debt. And what I mean by that, or that's it's not exactly debt, but it's almost like you've been doing this for 10 years. Do you ever feel like that's a long time and it kind of continues, like the stuff you've put out there continues to pull you in that way? Like where it's like, how do I leave this behind, or how do I change this up or make it new? Right. I feel like a lot of people are in that space too. At least that's how I felt personally. And some of the people I've talked to, but it's like, you get this, like all the stuff you've been producing. It's like, are you still tied to that stuff that you produced over this last decade? Is that still you? And
Yeah.
how much of that still restricts you in a way, or pulls you back, or keeps you from moving into a new space?
Instead of a debt, you could describe that as an anchor, perhaps.
Anchor, better. Yeah, much better.
And I am very blessed in that because I work as a COO in multiple companies,
Mm-hmm.
I get pulled in really different directions. My client, Dr. Avadia, is a heart surgeon. He's in really his first year of building a concierge heart health practice based on decades of being a heart surgeon. So all the problems involved there, that's one kind of problem. I have another client, Charles Mayfield. And Mayfield Pastures, he's a regenerative agriculturist. So he raises cows and raises pigs on his farm out in Tennessee. And he makes the greatest cosmetic skin cream in the nation that is non-toxic and it's cured all kinds of stuff. And it's just incredible. And so that is just amazing to be involved in that many different kinds of companies.
Yeah.
And so I think I get to keep on reliving what's in front of me like that. And I'm going to go, I know we're live on the podcast. I'm going to go tell my next call I'll be a few minutes late
Yeah,
because
for sure.
we we can't stop the conversation. So I get to keep on reliving stuff. And even right now with Lenders Online Training, that on the one hand, they've been a client for a decade. I built the back end of most of that company. On the other hand, it's now mine. It's no longer founder led. How do you take someone who started her business in the 70s, who everyone knows, who's written the manuals that define the reality for her field, tax return analysis training, very specific field if ever there was one? How do you transition that company into being a company that can last for longer and scale way beyond what the founder could do? That's a completely different question than how do you help a farmer start his cosmetics company, or how do
Mm-hmm.
you help a heart surgeon build a concierge heart practice? And so even as I learn stuff, I keep on getting
Mm-hmm.
tested. And the problems I have right now this year are completely different than 2 years ago.
Yep.
I was still doing the podcast then. But even with the podcast, you're talking about optionality before. And that's my thing is, okay, I want to create optionality. If you'd said, well, what's your monetization plan for the podcast? When I started in 2019, my monetization strategies is this is going to be good somehow. I'm going to
Right.
build more connections with people. I don't even know who that will be, but I know that it will somehow be good for me. And today, because I record on Mondays, I publish on Tuesdays, I'm recording 5 interviews today, and these 5 interviews will all be different. And
Mm-hmm.
I will learn something new from each one. And later today, I'll be talking to my wife, and I'll be talking about the interviews I did today. And I'll just get to share about here's what I've experienced, who I am, and it's going to be just fascinating to get to go through the list of here's what my day was. And I
Yeah.
don't know what it's going to be like. I still have 3 more after this one. I don't know what that's going to be like. I don't even
Yeah.
know, Tom, what from our conversation will stand out to me because I'm going to get quiet this afternoon and I'm going to think about each of these interviews I've done today. I'm going to ask myself what really mattered of that. What's the one thing for me that I should be paying attention to? So far from our conversation, it feels like optionality and
Mm-hmm.
looking at how can I build an optionality as I'm building out Lenders Online Training. I think
Mm.
that's the most important thing, but I could be wrong. And after I get quiet for a while, I might go for a walk, a long walk. I'll come back and I'll get to tell my wife, here's what I saw. Here's what I heard today. Here's what I learned. Here's how
Mm.
I'm different than I was when I woke up today. And so for me, I keep on changing because I keep on working with all these clients and then all these guests. I feel like I'm rambling, and that's not really an answer to
Well,
your question, but that was your
no, it
question
does.
was like 10 minutes ago.
I was also going to say, like, on that front, it'll be interesting too when you decide that, like, that's the thing to go all in with, because you have a
Yeah.
lot of projects too. And
Yeah.
that's actually something I've been contemplating the last few years too. And I actually, many things I did kind of scrap and put to the side, say, I'm going to focus most of my attention here, here, here. I got this great piece of advice from, I'm totally blanking on his name. I had him on the podcast, but the founder of Beard Brand, I believe. And we were
Yeah.
having dinner at some event. Actually, I think Sean McCabe's or Sean Wes's event when he was hosting that a couple of years ago. And offline, we were talking like just about business and whatnot. And that was one of the things he posed to me. It was like, well, when are you going to go full time with it? Like, when are you going to be all in with it?
Mm.
And I was like, well, because I'm like, actually, because I use the optionality piece or that kind of one end strategy, and I'm used to like throwing a lot of things at the wall or having a lot of things going. That's a very useful startup strategy, I feel like. But there's something about like some kind of like maturity or something like that as things mature. You have to say, okay, well, these are the winners. So I gotta let go of the losers, or the ones even that aren't losers, like loser, and not negatively saying, like, not even like, I don't mean that with a negative connotation. It's just the ones that didn't perform as well, or those ones that just weren't the right fit, even if they did perform well. So it's like those kind of quote
Yeah.
unquote losers, you got to pick, okay, I'm going to stick with these 3 out of 10 or this 1 out of 10 and really drive it. So it sounds like you have that opportunity in the next year to make that a serious thought.
6 months ago, I did a whole bunch of live streams through StreamYard out to Twitter, YouTube, etc. And I got more views in a month than I had in the podcast in 2 years. And I thought, man, what an opportunity. I should be doing podcast and live stream because this is going really, really well. And then I looked at it more and I thought, is this actually my path to create the kind of experience that I want, given how much energy it takes from me? And I killed off my live streams. I stopped doing the most successful social media strategy I've ever done in terms of views. And it hurt a little bit because I thought, man, I'd be getting a lot more views if I kept on doing that thing. But it freed up my brain to ask the question, what is the best version of Redbeard Radio, as opposed to Redbeard Radio and also the live stream and also, which we get in this trap of doing so many things. And Tom, we have to go wrap it up for the day. Obviously, we need to talk again about commitment versus optionality. That'll be our next interview. Tom, for folks to find you, it's tommorkes.com. That's TOMMORKES.com. Folks, if you go there, you can grab launch hacks, launch strategies for driving traffic, leads, and sales quickly. Tom also wrote the book, The Art of Instigating. It's on my bookshelf. I was looking at it as recently as yesterday. If you want a short book to give you that kick in the butt to get your project started, you want The Art of Instigating. Tom, thank you for being on Redbeard Radio.
Brian, thank you for having me. Thanks for everyone for listening, and I hope you got some value out of this.